Senator Hirono knows it too. So I can't wait to hear what she has to say today. Everybody, Senator Mazie Hirono.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay. Mahalo. Thank you. Aloha. Thank you so much, Jeremy. I had never gone through a Supreme Court hearing, but thank goodness that Jeremy was with me for the Gorsuch hearings. And then thanks to Jeremy, I now have Helene, which, many of you know Helene, and she was with me throughout the Kavanaugh hearings, which I have to say, I think that was a highly, how shall I say? It kind of sucked for a lot of people, me included. But it is certainly great to see so many of you here because we're all on the same page in our concern for what's happening to our courts. And I refer to it as court packing, although I know in the Roosevelt times it was about adding people to the court. But really, the courts are being packed every single day through our committee hearings and what's going on the floor of the Senate to confirm all of these totally right-wing, ideologically driven judges. So over the past 2.5 years, Donald Trump and Senator Mitch McConnell have been packing the courts with deeply partisan judges with extreme ideological agendas, and they've broken almost every rule, norm, and tradition to get there. Blue slips, gone. Shortening meaningful debate from 30 hours to 2, done. No hearings while senators are gone during a recess, out the window. By ignoring almost every rule and norm, they've been successful in steamrolling nominees through the process at breakneck speed. The numbers speak for themselves. Trump and McConnell have already confirmed nearly 13% of the entire 800-plus federal judiciary so far. And of course, they're not done yet. So that's 112 judges in only 2.5 years. When you look at the circuit courts, Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell have appointed nearly 23%. That's almost 1/4 of the federal circuit judges. And in fact, just yesterday in the Judiciary Committee, we had a judge, a district court judge who had only been a district court judge for 6 months, already to be elevated to the Third Circuit. That's what's happening. All of this didn't happen in a vacuum. Mitch McConnell and Republicans made every effort, such as not returning blue slips to block President Obama's judicial nominees. They made attempts to split the Ninth Circuit, deeming that court too liberal for their liking. The ultimate Mitch McConnell maneuver was to block Merrick Garland's nomination to the Supreme Court without so much as a by your leave. McConnell held that Supreme Court seat open for nearly a year, arguing without any historical precedent that in a presidential election year, the next president should fill the vacancy. And not only did McConnell hold that Supreme Court vacancy for almost a year, he then forced through a change in the number of Senate votes it takes to confirm a justice to the Supreme Court from 60 to a mere majority, and that's what's been happening. So, of course, if there's another Supreme Court vacancy before this election, Mitch McConnell will reverse his position so fast, it'll make your head spin. And the word hypocrisy has no meaning in the era of Trump. For Trump and McConnell, this is all about power. The power of Trump judges to achieve the extreme conservative outcomes that they can't accomplish through the regular legislative process. At a Chamber of Commerce event, Senator McConnell argued that while legislation can be repealed, he, quote, what can't be undone is a lifetime appointment. And one of the reasons Donald Trump's court packing has been so successful is because he has outsourced his judicial nomination process to the Federalist Society and the Heritage Foundation. And you all are the block to that, right? I'm counting on you guys. It's no surprise that over 80% of Trump's circuit court nominees have been Federalist Society members, and I am told that they are very busy. In fact, they're probably really stepping up their recruitment of members to the Federalist Society from as many law school students as possible. So at the center of the Federalist Society's campaign to transform the courts is Leonard Leo. He has been using dark money for years to get extremely partisan and ideologically driven judges onto the federal bench. Mr. Leo and the Federalist Society have made their goal clear. He wants to turn back the clock to a time of so-called limited constitutional government like we haven't seen since before the New Deal. And what does that mean? Plainly, before the Supreme Court recognized that women had the right to control our own bodies, before people could marry whoever they loved, whether because they were of a different race or the same sex, before workers, women, minorities, the elderly, the poor, you name it, had even the most basic protections. We're already seeing the impact of this transformation on our federal courts. Donald Trump's nominees are far less diverse and far more extreme in their ideologies than previous judicial nominees. I know all of you remember when Justice Kavanaugh promised to follow precedent during his confirmation hearing, only to pursue his partisan agenda after he received a lifetime appointment to the Supreme Court. It took only 4 months for Brett Kavanaugh to vote to enforce abortion restrictions in a Louisiana case that was essentially in conflict with a Supreme Court decision or Supreme Court precedent that is barely 2 years old. That's the whole women's decision. And Brett Kavanaugh wrote the only dissent in this recent Supreme Court decision. Almost as soon as Neil Gorsuch was confirmed to the court, he provided the crucial fifth vote in Janus v. Ashby. That case overturned a 40-year-old precedent and a setback to the rights and protections of public sector workers. This new 5-4 majority in the court has emboldened extreme conservatives to go on the offensive on issue after issue. And of course, what we're seeing is an all-out assault on a woman's constitutional right to an abortion. A flood of states like Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana are racing to pass anti-abortion laws that are clearly unconstitutional under Roe v. Wade. The silver lining, if there is one in all of this, is the growing recognition that who sits on our courts matter. Let me highlight a few examples of people recognizing the dangers of court packing. I heard from so many women who watched the Kavanaugh hearings and listened to Dr. Ford, who came forward to talk about their own experiences surviving rape and sexual assault. I heard from 2 people, women that I had known for years. One had been raped, she never talked about it. Another had been sexually assaulted, she never talked about it. And most of these women, they were part of all these women watching the Kavanaugh hearings, relating to what Dr. Ford was saying, knowing that they had those kinds of experiences themselves, never talking about it, but these horrible experiences stayed with them for decades. They know that in Justice Kavanaugh, we now have a justice who clearly opposes a woman's constitutional right to an abortion. So they're speaking out, filing lawsuits, and organizing their friends and families to vote in 2020. They're fighting for our right to control our own bodies. And people also know that with Justices Kavanaugh and Gorsuch on the court, the Affordable Care Act is also under threat. You know, I was at a dinner not too long ago where I sat next to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and the first thing I said to her was, "You have to live forever." So Texas and the Trump administration regarding the Affordable Care Act are counting on the newly confirmed justices ruling in their favor as they race to get the Supreme Court with a case to strike down the ACA, just throwing 20 million plus people out of the healthcare system. And at the Kavanaugh hearings, we heard from Jackson Corbin, a 13-year-old boy from Hanover, Pennsylvania, He said his brother Henry and his mom all live with Noonan syndrome, which includes a form of hemophilia. And Jackson told us how the ACA helped his family afford their clotting drugs and pay for the life-saving surgery and blood transfusion his brother Henry received. And it was a very emotional testimony, and those of us who listened to it, we had tears in our eyes to see this young person come forward, and he stood up and said clearly, quote, "We must have justices on the Supreme Court who will save the Affordable Care Act, safeguard pre-existing conditions, and protect our care," end quote. I couldn't have said it better. As lawyers, you understand how critical it is to have independent and fair-minded judges, because it is these judges that have stopped some of Trump's worst decisions, policies, actions. It was a federal judge in San Diego who put an end to Trump's family separation policies and forced the Trump administration to reunite with their families last year. And we all saw the ensuing chaos as the administration tried to match these children with their parents. And that's because the Trump administration didn't even keep track of most of the families they separated. The Trump administration had made instant orphans of these children, but for a federal judge in San Diego issuing a nationwide injunction to stop this cruelty, the administration would never have reunited these children with their parents. Then we all remember the 800,000 dreamers facing possible deportation from the only country and home that they know. And when Trump summarily ended the DACA program, it took 2 federal judges in California and New York to issue nationwide injunctions last year to stop this particular Trump insanity. Now, Vice President Pence wants to ask the Supreme Court to get rid of nationwide injunctions, saying, whoa, this president has more injunctions against him than any other president. Well, we all know why. Good grief. If they weren't breaking the law and the Constitution at every turn, these judges, thank goodness that there are these independent judges to impose nationwide injunctions. So Donald Trump, Mike Pence, Mitch McConnell, and Senate Republicans are counting on their partisan, ideologically driven judges to uphold their unconstitutional policies. And speaking of partisanship, what could have been more partisan than the diatribe from Kavanaugh, wherein he accused all of the Democratic members of some sort of a conspiracy against him. This is the kind of people we're putting on the United States Supreme Court. That's why it's important that you're here today. And I've said, just as I have said to my staff, I've been saying this for years, you know, part of our jobs when we have the privilege for doing what we do, that there are people in our country who are getting screwed every single second, minute, hour of the day. And if by our actions we can lessen that number, we will be doing our jobs. We will be doing the right thing. What I also say is half the battle is showing up. So you folks have shown up. And showing up means not just physically being here, but to stay the course, because it's going to take us continuing to be on course to turn the tide against the court packing that is going on. And believe me, the Federalist Society has been spending decades and millions of dollars to get their judges into their lifetime positions. So the integrity and independence of the federal judiciary is at stake. I know that the next panel will be talking about Supreme Court reform. And at this point, really, a question I have is, why the heck should anyone get a lifetime appointment anywhere, but particularly to the Supreme Court? So as Mitch McConnell and Leonard Lear know all too well, once the Supreme Court makes a constitutional ruling, that's the last word. It cuts off policymaking on that issue. And I know there are a lot of thought-provoking ideas about how to reform the Supreme Court, term limits, adding judges, changing how justices are selected. And while we're debating court reform, let's not forget that reform can happen through the ballot box. In fact, 2020, that's when reform can happen. Elections matter. Elections have consequences. We see that with the election of Donald Trump. I often say that the rights we fought for and thought we won decades ago often do not stay won. Eternal vigilance is necessary. People across the country, including obviously all of you in this room, are doing just that, being eternally vigilant. You are stepping forward to fight to protect the independence and fairness of the judiciary. And there are a lot of people in our country whose civil rights, whose voting rights, whose right to choice are all being threatened by these right-wing judges that are being peopled all over our place, all over our courts. So you know that I will be there fighting right alongside you. Activism is important. I know you're sitting here listening to every word. Yeah, right. I'm not saying anything that you haven't heard or haven't thought about, of course, but it takes action for the true reform to happen. So I will be there with you. Mahalo nui loa. Aloha.